Today I was asked to speak about the interplay of Islamic ethics and artificial intelligence, preferably avoiding my favorite subject of bioethics itself. So, by the way, I am Mohammad Ghaly, professor of Islam and biomedical ethics. I suppose you heard my affiliation from the colleague who presented me. So I was supposed to speak about bioethics in particular and artificial intelligence, but I suppose that my colleague, Dr. Padilla, did this homework. So I was asked to speak about the topic of Islamic ethics in general. This is my broad field, Islamic ethics and artificial intelligence. And I chose the topic of smart city ethics, mainly because I'm currently working on a publication on this topic together with Dr. Junaid Qadir. By the way, my great thanks for him for inviting me to this conference, for participating in the course that I have been teaching this semester on Islamic ethics and artificial intelligence. So we are working together also in collaboration with other colleagues, including Dr. Ala Al-Fuqaha at my university, Hamad bin Khalifa University. So I thought it will be a good idea to share the first thoughts about this topic. So I will approach the smart city ethics through the lens of the centuries-old thinking, theorization, and attempts to develop the so-called the best possible place to live in, utopia, or virtuous city, or as we call it in Arabic, Al-madina, Al-fadila. The knowledge and information that I will present today, they are based on earlier interventions and things that I learned from other colleagues. We organized an international seminar in our Research Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics, Ghaly, on artificial intelligence this year in May. By the way, Dr. Junaid Qadir was also one of the participants in this conference. And main contributors to this seminar were experts in the artificial intelligence field, much more than Islamic studies experts. So we made this so that we, the people in Ghaly, could learn more about what engineers mean by artificial intelligence, what experts in other fields beyond the Islamic studies, including also lawyers and policymakers, etc. What do they mean when they speak about artificial intelligence? What kind of challenges do they come across? So personally, I learned from this experience. And during this semester, fall of 2021, I taught a course on Islamic ethics and artificial intelligence, where I also invited a number of guest lecturers from different fields related to artificial intelligence, which makes part of our MA program in Applied Islamic Ethics at Hamad bin Khalifa University. So this is the background, more or less, of my talk today. This is the outline of my talk. I will first speak about utopia or virtuous city in three elements. First, the context, the imagined moral ideal, then the theorization of those who wrote about the virtuous city, what makes a city virtuous, and then the focus on the ethical issues. Then we move to the smart city, again, the same three elements: context, the imagined urban ideal, and then theorization, what makes a city smart, and then the ethical issues, and then I will go on concluding remarks in order to see what lessons can the model of a smart city learn from the previous models developed about the utopia or virtuous cities, lessons to be learned by doing what they did or not doing what they did before. First, the utopia or the virtuous city, the imagined moral ideal. It seems this is one of the main concerns of humans throughout history, to think of the best place to live in. This is something that people, intellectuals, philosophers, scholars, also udaba, people in literature, poets, etc. They have always been trying to think of what would this ideal place look like. And then we have this under the term utopia. Now we have even utopian studies as a field of research. And usually the imagined ideal was mainly moral in character. So when people speak about utopia, they had moral concerns. So they start with dissatisfaction with one's reality. They are not satisfied with the reality they are living in, those who theorized utopia or the virtuous city or Al-madina, Al-fadila. So the starting point is that they are not satisfied with what they have, and they think the ideal place to live in is much better than what we have at the moment. Of course, some of these theorists, or utopian theorists, if we may call them, they were, some of them lived crises. Some of them were intellectual crises, some of them were military crises, the defeat of their countries or their empires, etc., colonization or on the eve of colonization, etc. And sometimes just because of a moral failure of the society as they perceived it, this moral failure. So starting with dissatisfaction with one's reality and then proposing moral reform, how to make this reality better. And usually the main power of writers on utopia or models of utopia was imagination, the power of the imagination. So this imagination usually took one of the two ways, and sometimes they make a hybrid model. One way would speak about the so-called utopia, showing the how the ideal should look like. So they will write about an imaginary community or society whose members have perfect qualities or virtues, and thus the society functions optimally. So here, focusing on the good side, how to magnify the goodness in order to create the ideal society or the ideal community, the utopia. And sometimes they would focus on the opposite, what is bad in society, what makes them unsatisfied with this society. And then they would magnify and enlarge, zoom out, the moral badness of reality in order to make it more visible to the people, so that they will realize how bad the situation is and how bad the situation can be, and in sort of incentivizing them to think of a better reality. Of course, the imagination, or the power of imagination and imaginary character of the utopia, means that we don't speak about something realized and not something existing in reality. And we need to keep this with some reservation, because this is usually mentioned as one of the characteristics of utopia and one of the key differences between utopia and smart city, that utopia is imaginary, but smart city is something that we could realize and that we can realize and improve, etc. Yes, utopia remains imaginary, and when we think of it at the time of the writer. So when Plato wrote Republic, it was imaginary. He tried to implement it. He did not succeed in that, and things went worse than what he thought, etc. But it doesn't mean that it remained imaginary all the time. It will remain imaginary all the time. We cannot think of the works of Plato and his impact on different civilizations, including the Islamic civilization, the modern Western civilization, and that many of these imaginary ideas at this time impacted our modern reality. So it's imaginary at its time, but it doesn't remain imaginary forever. But at the time, it is the power of imagination of the writer that make it possible to develop a model for the best place to live in. In the attempts to theorize utopia or virtuous city or the best place to live in, what makes a city virtuous? What makes a city or a place utopia, an ideal place to live in? Of course, as we will see, there are great differences and diversity of opinions about this, but there is one main focus and characteristic which is quite important for our thinking about utopia or the virtuous city, and for our thinking later about the smart city, is that the focus is the human being. What makes the society virtuous is its members. The people, when the people are good moral beings, then the society will, or the community or the city state will be a virtuous one. So the inhabitants of the city, the Ethiopians, and that's why the title of Al-Farabi's work on Utopia or the virtuous city called Ara'u Ahli al-Madina al-fadila. His focus is on Ahli al-Madina, the citizens of the city, the inhabitants of the city, people who live in this city. So the focus is the human being, not the city as a collection of buildings or institutions or something like this, but it is the human. The focus is the human. And utopia, or thinking about utopia, is not only something classical, and is not only something Greek or something Islamic, but it is a trans-historical and trans-cultural concern. As I told you, humans, it seems, from the very beginning of human history up to the moment, we are busy with this idea, how to create a place where we can ideally live and optimally live. So we are not speaking about something only classical or Greek or Islamic. We speak about something which is trans-historical and trans-cultural. Of course, we cannot enlist in this presentation, we cannot give a comprehensive list of the attempts of theorizing the virtuous city or the utopia. But we have important examples or representative examples that are particularly important because of their own value and their impact on this field, or because of their relevance to our main topic, the smart city ethics. The Republic of Plato, written around 375 BC, is one of the most important works in this field, if not the most important one and the most influential one. This is one of the important works in this field and the pioneer works in this field. Thomas More's work entitled Utopia is particularly important because this is the first known work to use the term utopia in the title. He wrote it in 1516, and it was translated into English in 1551. The work of Aldous Huxley, A Brave New World, written in 1932, after the big events happened in the world, including, of course, the First World War. And I told you, usually people would think of writing about the best place to live in when people are passing by crisis. And of course, the World War is one of the major important crises in human history. So he wrote A Brave New World, and Brave New World is particularly important because here we see the role of science and technology, how science and technology started to play a role in the modern attempts in theorizing utopia or dystopia, how science is shaping the society from A to Z, as we will see. So, and from here, we will see the easy link to the smart city and artificial AI-based technologies later on. So throughout different phases of history, we have these attempts. And now, as I told you, we have Utopian studies as a field, the distinct field of study and research area. And it is transcultural. These works, the three works that I have shown, have all been translated into Arabic. Plato's Republic was translated by Ishaq ibn Huyayn, who died, I think, 910. So in the 9th, 10th century, he translated into Arabic. Some historians say this. Unfortunately, the full Arabic translation of Ishaq ibn Huyayn is lost. Only Jamal Badawi, he published the remaining scattered parts of this translation. And then it was translated fully into Arabic from English, not from the Greek origin, by Hanna Khabbaz in 1929. And then others translated it, like Fuad Zakaria, later on, also from English, and then compared with Greek origin by a specialist in Greek language, etc. So Plato's Republic also started to play a role in within the Islamic civilization in early times, as we will see with Al-Farabi, and in the modern times. The Utopia of Thomas More was translated into Arabic in 1974. Aldous Huxley, A Brave New World, was translated in 1947 into Arabic under the title Al-Alam Al-Tarif. Was translated into Arabic. These are about translations in order to see this connection between different worlds, the different historical periods, crossing cultures, civilizations through translation. But the Islamic civilization had its own also works on utopia or utopian theorization, if we may say. We have the work of Abu Nasr al-Farabi, who died 950. So in the 10th century, his work is one of the most famous works on utopia in the Islamic civilization, entitled Ara Al-madina Al-fadila wa mudaddatiha. So it's about utopia and dystopia. So he tries to connect both. What is the best possible place to live in, and what's could be the worst possible place to live in, to make this comparison. Virtuous, or Ibn Rushd, he wrote a commentary on Plato's Republic, as he wrote commentaries on many of his other works. Unfortunately, the Arabic origin, the original Arabic version of Ibn Rushd's commentary on Plato is lost. So it remained only in a Hebrew translation, which was available in different manuscripts. And then from Hebrew, it was translated into English twice. Once by Franz Rosenthal in 1956, and later on by another translator in 1974. And in 1998, this English was translated into Arabic, trying to revive the original Arabic. And those who read the Arabic translation, you feel that the translator tries to use the classical terminology. It tries to come as close as possible to Averroes, and uses also sometimes the terminology that we see in the work of Al-Farabi. So these are all attempts within the Islamic civilization. Some works also are counted within utopian studies, like Epistle of Forgiveness, Risalat al-Ghufran, by the poet and philosopher Abu al-Ala al-Ma'arri, who died 1057. It is also one of the works, if we may categorize it as a utopian or dystopian work. It combines between both, and it sees that the utopia as the paradise and dystopia as the hellfire. This is the ultimatum, utopia and dystopia, and again an imaginary work about people who ended up in paradise and those who ended up in hellfire, and the author would have dialogue with these people in paradise and hellfire, and how life can go to the maximum possible good or the maximum possible bad. Also, in a bit more recent works, there is the work al-Qura, and al-Qura here means Mecca, by Abdurrahman al-Kawakibi. He wrote this work in 1859 when the Muslim world was in a crisis, on the verge of European colonization, etc. He wrote it in a way that looks like a conference. People coming together. He brought the intellectuals, the prominent figures in the Muslim world, coming together in order to see the crisis that we have. How can we get out of this crisis? How can we create a better Muslim ummah? More recently, Salama Musa wrote the work Ahlam al-Falasifa, in which he introduced utopia as the dream of the philosophers throughout history. He commented on earlier works, starting from Plato's Republic and Thomas More's Utopia and others, and introducing his own Egyptian utopia in 1926. What are the ethical issues that are there in these works, which are transcultural and trans-historical, in which they try to think of the utopia, the best place to live in? Justice was one of the virtues, one of the moral issues that cut across almost every single piece on or every single work on utopia, starting from Plato. Justice at the individual level, how this can be achieved, what we mean by justice. Is it good to be just, or is it better for the human being to be unjust? And justice at the societal level, how to create a just society. Religion was a very important aspect, especially in classical works, even from the work of Plato's Republic, where Plato, for instance, says that in utopia, or in the ideal place on the Republic, his imagined Republic, there is no place, and there is zero tolerance for anywhere that tarnishes the image of gods and the heroes. Even the very famous Greek poet Homerus, he said that it should be banned because his works do not show the due respect to gods. When we see the work of Al-Farabi, for instance, it starts with distinct chapters about the concept of God and Godhead, Al-Uluhiyya, about prophethood and Nubuwwah, etc. So Al-Farabi is clearly outlining the religious moral world before getting into the details of Al-Madina, Al-fadila. رسالة الغفران of Abu al-Ala al-Ma'arri, the epistle on forgiveness, is about one of the main religious beliefs of Muslims, about that there is a hereafter. The people in the hereafter will end up either in paradise, which is the absolute goodness, or the hellfire, which is the absolute evil. Also, the modern work of Al-Kawakibi, al-Qura, he used the Mecca as because of its special religious place in the hearts and in the minds of Muslims. So it was and it has been, and it remains to be, at least in the Islamic writings on Al-madina, Al-fadila, it remained playing a very important role. But in the modern works, Western works on utopia and dystopia, we see some shifts in the role assigned to religion. So, for instance, the Brave New World of Huxley, we see that Henry Ford is replacing God. Huxley presented his work as dystopia, especially how science can be quite dangerous and risky for our world, etc., and how God can be replaced, etc. But it was, as people said, historians mentioned, his work was well received by young people, like university students in the United States of America, as utopia, not as dystopia. So getting rid of God, replacing this with capitalism and the significance of money in society, and instead of religion, etc., as something good, not as something bad. So we see shifts in the role of religion in works on utopia and dystopia in the West, but the significance of religion remained in the works on utopia in the Islamic civilization and Islamic writings. Science and technology. Of course, in the classical works, we don't see this very much. Some modern readers and analysts of Plato's Republic would say that the young guardians who play a significant role in the structure of Plato's Republic, that they undergo some kind of brainwashing in order to serve the city-state or the Republic. They would see this some kind of science fiction or using science to influence people's brains and cognitive activities or something like this. But we see the role of science and technology getting more and more in the theorizing the utopia, especially from the Brave New World of Huxley, when we see that science is shaping society from A to Z. It was in the 30s, but he spoke about designer babies and using IVF, chemically controlled emotions and chemically initiated emotions for the citizens. So the citizens are completely controlled by science and technological advancements. And some of the commentaries on Brave New World, they said that Huxley's goal was to warn us that science can end up controlling us instead of being a tool in our hands to improve our life. It can be the tool that controls us, that not the tool that we control, but the tool that controls our life. And even some of the writers on smart city, they use the work of Huxley to say that using technology in a smart city can end up being counterproductive for human welfare. Material comfort and luxury, because this is an important point that we will talk about when we speak about smart city. Material comfort and luxury in the classical theorization of utopia played a very marginal role. Very, very marginal role. The focus was on what Plato called eudaimonia, which can be translated as human flourishing or even as happiness. But happiness here is not because maximizing pleasures and minimizing pains, whether these pleasures and pains are coming from physical or material, like financial gains or something like this, but it is the result of moral thought, that we can control our desires, our low desires and temptations through our human intellect. This is what achieves the eudaimonia. And the people in the Plato's Republic or the citizens of Al-Farabi's Al-madina, Al-fadila, are the people who achieve happiness because of this, because of mastering al-ma'qulat, the moral thinking. not because of gaining material comfort and luxury. Even Plato in the Republic, when he spoke about the classes of the society, he put at the top the wisdom livers, in the middle the victory lovers, the militants, and at the bottom the pleasure seekers, the usual workers and craftsmen. Al-Farabi, when he spoke about the head of the city-state, Al-madina Al-fadila, he said he is someone who is quite moderate when it comes to pleasures resulting from food, drinks, or sexual pleasure. He's not someone who is very much under influence of al-dirham wa dinar, the money, etc. So the focus was more on the virtues, developing the virtues, controlling the desires and temptations, not accumulating the pleasures, whether they are physical or financial. Also, one of the important things in the early theorizations about Utopia, the best place to live in, was that there was a bigger picture all the time. There was a governing moral world. The writers, when they try to draft the sketch of the virtuous city, they do this because they already have a clear understanding about human nature. What is human nature? So Plato, for instance, when he is dividing the classes of the Republic, he speaks about 3 classes, and each of the 3 classes is linked to a specific virtue. So this virtue will be magnified by this class, and this virtue will be magnified by this class, etc. There is a clear understanding about the universe, the rule of God in this universe, the types of values and virtues that should dominate the society in order to create the good society. So there is a governing moral world. Yes, this governing moral world is not static, is not the same by every writer about this. Of course, we speak about different historical periods. We speak about different cultures, civilizations, religions, etc. So the governing moral world differs, but it is always there. So they always try to theorize the virtuous city in the light of their moral world. As I mentioned, Al-madina Al-fadila of Al-Farabi does not start with describing the people in Al-madina Al-fadila, but it starts with God. It starts with prophethood. It starts with what we mean by God. What are the characteristics of God? How should we relate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? About prophethood, the nature of prophethood, the revelation, all this. And then he moves to Al-madina Al-fadila. So there was always Al-madina Al-fadila is emanating from a governing moral world, which was the bigger had the bigger pictures. When we now look at the works of Al-madina Al-fadila or the Utopia, or even when different writers would look at the works of their predecessors, they had ethical concerns. Some of these concerns have to do with having different cultures and religions, having different moral worlds, as we say. For instance, the Republic of Plato, this ideal place to live in, there was no place for marriage-based family, where the lines of paternity are well defined, are well determined through, for instance, biological relatedness or marital relationship or whatever, because the greater goal for the people living in Plato's Republic is to serve the city-state. So they shouldn't be concerned with taking care of children or something like this. This should be done separately. So people will not even know their children, their children that are biologically related to them. They are taken at a certain moment, taken care of by the state, and people should only focus on serving the city. When it comes to the Muslim moral world, this is unimaginable because normatively speaking, no sexual relationship without marriage, without religiously valid marital contract, etc. So here you see ethical concerns. What is ideal in one historical or cultural context is absolute evil in another one. And some of these ethical concerns happen because of time. Because of the historical shifts in our moral thinking, like the focus on individual liberties. Now it's quite important, especially in Western modern Western theorizations about the ideal place to live in, like the smart city now. Historically speaking, this was not the main concern of the people who theorized utopia. So it was much more that the states should streamline people. We have distinct classes, each class should be static. So moving from one class or going up to a higher class was quite difficult thing. These are all problematic issues in our modern world. So this is about the utopia. Now we go to the second part about the smart city. We need to understand the context, and that the context of the birth of a smart city as a concept, as a phenomenon, or even as an application within the field of artificial intelligence is quite different than the context of writing about utopia. So yes, we are still thinking about the best place, the ideal, the optimal place to live in, but the context is different. So the context is not a moral crisis. So people who are thinking of the smart city, they are not thinking of the smart city because there is a moral crisis in the society and we want to propose a moral reform. No. The imagined ideal here is an imagined urban ideal, not imagined moral ideal. We have urbanization as a phenomenon coming with its own challenges. There is urbanization, the gradual shifts in residence of the human population from rural to urban areas. There is a trend of moving from rural to urban areas. Like today, for instance, I'm in my village, spending time in Egypt with my family. And I'm struggling with the internet connection and electricity to be live with you online. That's why, because of the lack of these facilities, people are always willing to move to the urban areas, to the cities, and to leave the villages. At least most of the people, not everyone is like myself. So there is a curve, growing curve of urban population growth worldwide from about 750 million in 1950 to 4.2 billion in 2018, making now more than half of population on Earth are living in urban areas. By 2025, quite in a couple of years, this will move to 68% of the people. So we'll have 2.5 more billion people moving to urban areas, to cities. And this growing curve of urbanization is putting pressure on infrastructure, on housing, on transportation, on energy systems, and on the basic services, like people will have work, jobs, in these cities, education, healthcare, etc. So this is the context. We have challenges of urbanization, growing curve of urbanization. More pressure is put on the infrastructure and services and facilities provided by these cities. People move to the cities in order to get more services, better infrastructure, better facilities. But when more and more people move there, things will eventually collapse. So there will be problem of sustainability, livability, quality of life in the cities will be quite problematic. So the smart city is coming to solve this problem. So smart city is developed in order to solve the problem of urbanization, and not to solve the moral problems that Plato or Al-Farabi or Averroes were busy with. And that's why the focus of the literature on the smart city is on the city, not on the citizens of the city, not on the inhabitants of the city. The city as an urban area, not as a community, as a society having people. That's the focus of the work because of this context. What makes a city smart? We have big conceptual ambiguity in this regard. When I read different works on the smart city, I found even some studies published a couple of years ago. They counted more than 30 definitions for what smart city is. And these definitions widely vary depending on who is defining. So the urban architect would see a smart city different than a computer engineer, i.e. expert, or a government policymaker, etc. But by reviewing literature, there are some common characteristics that we can see in what makes a smart city smart, what makes a city smart city. One of these key characteristics is the large scale use of technologies, especially AI-based technologies, intensive use of artificial intelligence technologies. So for instance, a smart city, a typically smart city, would have advanced sensors everywhere. Biosensors, electronic sensors, chemical, smart grid sensors. Why? Because we need to collect as much information, as much data as possible in order to create this big data that will be processed, analyzed, in order to inform policymakers and in order to provide better services to people living in this smart city. So there is greater role for the smart machines and systems, much more and much bigger role than conventional cities. Also, one of the key characteristics of a smart city, as promoted by the people who theorize for smart city, is material comfort and luxury. They always speak about quality of life, that there is better quality of life in a smart city. Most of the time, they mean hereby more comforts and more luxury in the material sense. Like for instance, in a smart city, you will have less traffic jams, because we are controlling everything through these sensors, so we can better manage the traffic. Driverless cars, you don't have to drive every time to go to your work or to your house. We'll have these autonomous cars. Improved parking availability, the smart parking, so everything is smart, including parking. So you don't have to move around every block of the city looking for the parking. You can even book this automatically before leaving home, and you know where you are going to park, so you don't waste time in this. Smart waste management, so we will put sensors in the smart bins, as they call it, so that they will be collected only when they are full. Less administrative paperwork. If you want to get your birth certificate or marriage certificate or something like this, you do everything online. You don't have to go and queue and start in long lines to get your paperwork done, etc. So life will be much easier than it is in a conventional city. Some would add things like more environment friendly, but these are issues which are not universally accepted by everyone, that if we don't have this, then the city will not be smart anymore. Now we go to the ethical issues of a smart city. Privacy pops up as maybe the most important ethical issue when we talk about smart city. And by the way, when we talk about artificial intelligence in general, but smart city as one of the main applications, AI applications, privacy is quite important. Why? Because collecting as much data as possible We said that this is one of the key characteristics of a smart city. We cannot make the city smart without having big data. We need to collect as data as possible. Smart city is a data thirst entity. There is thirst for data. We have to collect as much data as possible in order to make better planning. But when we collect this data is about myself, is about you, is about everyone living in the cities, and we are concerned about our own privacy, the confidentiality of our information. The data collected can widely vary, starting from the time of going to sleep and waking up, the places that I go to, the things that I buy online, through online shopping. Every single thing that you can do throughout your day in, day out life can be recorded. And people would wonder where this information goes, and who has access to this information, and what do governments what will governments do with this information? Can they be used, for instance, for police investigation later on, and something like this? So privacy now is one of the universal moral values that we see in writings in the Islamic tradition, in Western moral philosophy, everywhere. And we cannot make a real smart city without collecting big data. That's why we have now so many studies trying to navigate how to combine these two conflicting issues. On one hand, we need the data, and on the other hand, we need to respect people's privacy. Justice, which we have just seen in the works on YouTube, comes also in ethical discussions on smart city. A smart city and artificial intelligence in general is usually accused of widening the wealth gap. The divide between the poor and the rich is just getting bigger and bigger. Smart cities will add to the already existing social inequality because of the already existing digital divide. I was just saying that in my village, there is great difficulty to get internet connection. So how are we going to have a smart city if we don't have even a digital infrastructure? So only the rich will have these smart cities, and the poor will get poorer and less privileged. This is one of the great concerns about smart cities. Others would say, no, the smart city would even improve the social justice by, for instance, providing more affordable housing. So we can give better services and cheaper services by using all these technologies to the poor people. Machines are replacing humans and disturbing the job market. As we mentioned earlier, one of the key characteristics of a smart city is that we have an increasingly big role for machines and for AI-based systems. So instead of having humans who will do, let's say, the administrative paperwork for the municipality, everything will be digitized. Everything will be automated. So these people will lose their jobs. Accountants, all things that can be automated through algorithms, we will not need humans for doing this, because AI systems will do these tasks in a much better way, in a much more efficient way, and more importantly, in a much cheaper way. So the people say, okay, humans will lose jobs. This will create economic problems. Others say, no, jobs will not get less, but the job market will become different. So these humans who do the paperwork in the municipality, yes, we will lose these jobs, but other jobs will be created. Other jobs will be created. Anyhow, at least there will be disturbance in the job market. Some jobs will disappear, new jobs will appear, etc. Another concern in machines replacing humans is the human-human interaction. at least from the COVID-19 pandemic that we are going through at the moment, we realize that human-human interaction is important by itself, in itself, and for itself. So it seems we like to see each other face to face and to speak to each other and so to say salam alaikum to each other. It seems this is important for our psychology. And not having this is a problem. So by having smart cities and having more machines than humans, so you will interact with machines much more than with humans. This can create problems, especially for what we call the care robots. For instance, if we have an elderly house and people who are serving, let's say, coffee and the daycare to the elderly, we can all replace this by having robots who are much more nice to the elderly people than the humans. They will never scream at them. They will never get angry. They are very patient. They can do much more delicious coffee. They can provide coffee much more regularly. They will never complain whenever they are asked to wake up at midnight or something like this. This is all nice, but it seems human-human interaction is important. And how much of this human-human interaction are we able to sacrifice? This is also a problem. Material luxury, and here comes consumerism. A smart city is, let's say, is born in a specific context. Is not born in a vacuum. And this is the age where the smart city is born. It is the age of material luxury. It is the age where money is getting more and more important. We have the very famous work of Michael Sandel, What Money Cannot Buy. So money became that important. So to the extent that an important philosopher, one of the most important philosophers at the moment, would write a book, What Money Cannot Buy. It's like the titles that we had before, What Computers Cannot Do and What Genes Cannot Do. So we have also What Money Cannot Buy. So smart city is coming to magnify this, to give this promise. That under the title or the slogan, quality of life, you will have much more luxury. You will be able to get all what you want, etc. And that's why some, especially of the very recent writings on smart city, they say that smart city is not an AI application, neutral AI application. It is the product of a governing moral world. Yes, people who write about smart city, they write about smart city as a solution to urbanization challenges. They don't speak, they are not philosophers who would speak about the governing moral world. It's not like Al-Farabi's Al-madina, Al-fadila. We have chapters first about uluhiyya, nubuwa, wahi, etc. And then you go to the virtuous city, theorize the virtuous city. They said, yes, that's true, but there is a governing moral world, even if it is implicit. And this governing moral world is neoliberalism. Is neoliberalism. And we need to be aware of this, even if we accept it, but we need to be aware of this, and we need to scrutinize the impact of this governing moral world on how the model of a smart city is born and is going to function. Now I move to the my concluding remarks. By introducing these two discussions, on one hand, the utopia, and then on the smart city, I would like to argue, I hope that it is clear now, that smart city is not just neutral AI application or neutral technology. A smart city is not just a number of sensors put in the city, or doing smart parking smart waste management and all the smart lists. It is part of man's long journey throughout history, looking for creating the best possible place to live in. We have been busy with this as humans. It doesn't matter what religion we have, what ideology we have. And smart city is one of the important stations in this long journey. This is how we need to situate the smart city. So, in fact, it is not something new in this regard. What is new is the characteristics of the smart city. So when we think about smart city, we need to ask ourselves, what makes a place an ideal place to live in? What makes a place the best possible place to live in? We need to be aware of the socio-political, moral context. There is neoliberalism, which is penetrating everywhere, by the way, including the Muslim world. We are tended to see economic growth as equal to human progress, human flourishing, to happiness. Even to, according to Plato's understanding in the Republic, although it is not true. In the past, this luxury, material luxury, was seen as the lowest thing in the society, the last thing to think about. Yes, we speak about basic needs that must be fulfilled, etc. But going to the level of luxury, this is not the main thing that makes the city a virtuous city or that makes a city utopia. But this is what makes a city a smart city. Not necessarily because of the smart city itself, but because of the context we are living in at the moment. We need to question this bigger picture and the governing moral world. The smart city, the model of the smart city is born in the context of powerful tech giants and multinationals. When Plato was thinking about the Republic, when Al-Farabi was thinking about Al-madina, Al-fadila, we were living in the age of empires. Empires, large empires, whose borders are religiously colored. Colored by religions. We had the Islamic Empire, the Byzantine Empire, which is the Christian Empire, and we had the Persian Empire, etc. And later, when Al-Kawakibi was thinking about al-Qura, we were in the shift, moving from the empires to the modern nation states. So the state government would have the power. We need to be aware now that we are moving from this to tech giants and multinationals that are, in many cases, if not in all cases, much more powerful than the states, the modern nation states. So the Facebook, Google, Apple, etc., they are for sure much more powerful than many modern nation states around the world. So these tech giants and these multinationals, because of their power, they determine what's good and what's bad. And if we want to rethink what makes a smart city utopia at the end, or dystopia, we need to be aware of the role and the power played by these tech giants. And by the way, one of the good things about these tech giants is that they have the market economy. They listen to the people. So when they know that the great majority of the people are willing to go this way, they will go with that, most of the time, at least. We need to see smart city not as something unprecedented that we have never thought of, etc., or that is something just produced by technology. As long as it is beneficial, then it is good, etc. About maslaha-oriented thinking. We need to think about the centuries-long wisdom and insights about the human thinking, human moral thinking about the best place, best possible place to live in. What makes city good city is not something new. It has been discussed throughout history. And what makes city good city, or what makes life good life, is not only about having nice buildings and functioning municipality. It's about the morality of the people who are living in these cities. It's not about material, not at least not only about material luxury, and not first and foremost about material luxury, but about the values that we cherish, the virtues that we develop. I understand that we have this slogan now that we see in many writings, human-centered smart city. To my mind, this slogan, human-centered smart city, is introduced because smart cities are not human-centered. At least this is how it is introduced. It is city-centered. It is urban area-centered. So what we care about are the facilities, are the luxury that we produce to the people. And I dare to say that this slogan, human-centered smart city, again, is not centralizing human or re-centralizing human in the way that we have seen in the theorizing attempts about virtuous city or utopia, but they are re-centralizing the human here as a customer. So we want to know what these customers need. What do they need? What are their priorities? What would make them live in a smart city rather than in an individual city? The morality is not in the focus. Morality is coming in to solve problems like privacy. We have problem with privacy, how to solve this problem. We have social inequality, we have to solve this problem. We don't think about first about what makes city good, what makes life good, and then we put the smart city within that. The last thing that I want to highlight here is that when we think about smart morality of a smart city, we need to be aware that for sure there are things that are universal in nature, but the lessons to be learned from the discussions on utopia, that there is particular morality. We will have differences about what's good and what's bad, and what makes smart city good and what makes smart city bad. We have seen the discussions, like for instance, Plato's Republic, where marriage is not important, family is not an important institution, while in the Muslim moral and Islamic moral world, it is very central. So for sure, we will have these issues that we also need to be aware of. This is all what I had to say. Thank you so much for listening.